Hey, and welcome back. And in this lesson, we are going to look at the shading node or the material node editor. So in a previous lesson, we looked at how to create a new material and how to assign that to your different objects in your scene, and also how to change things like the color and the reflectivity and the roughness, etc. on that material. So now we're going to take it a little bit further, and I'm going to show you how to add a little bit more of advanced materials to your objects. So first of all, let's start by deleting our light and our camera in our scene. And we're going to leave this cube, and this is what we are going to use to add some materials to. So first of all, I'm going to click this cube, and then I'm going to go to the material tab here on the side, the material properties that we looked at before. And this is where you can set the different colors. So the base color you can change here. And to preview that material in your viewport, we just need to set this right here at the top to the material preview. And this is basically going to change to the Eevee renderer just so that we can kind of see what is happening in our scene. So it's super fast, nice and smooth, and you can see the color and the reflectivity and all of those things. So let's say we want to add some textures or some images to this material. So with this cube selected, I'm going to click on the shading tab right here at the top, and this is going to take us into the shading workspace. So first of all, you can still use your normal controls to move around the scene, middle mouse click, and then control middle mouse click to zoom, shift to pan, etc. So same keys, so I'm going to zoom in here slightly so we can see the cube a little bit better. And here at the bottom is our material node area where we're going to work with the different nodes, add different nodes, and just connect them and see what we can create. So you can use the same controls again here. So if I do a middle click on my mouse, I can pan around, and control middle click, I can zoom in and out. So very similar to the normal controls that you are used to. So we can zoom in here, and I can see we've got a material output node. So this is just kind of the final node in your node tree. And then we've got this principled BSDF, and this is our shader. So with this cube selected, I'm going to just click on this little material editor or material properties on the side. And this part, this principled BSDF, is exactly the same as all these settings that I showed you earlier. So you can see there it's got the red color. And if I change any of these properties, this will reflect on this side as well. So let's say if I increase my metallic, you can see on the right hand side, it's also increasing on this panel. So this is exactly the same thing. It's just a different way to look at it. And in the node editor, we can obviously then connect different nodes to this node. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to set this metallic back to 0, and you can see it's going to update on this right hand side as well. So let's see what we can do. So you can see all these little dots on the left hand side, and this means that these are inputs. You can input another node and connect it to these dots. So we're not going to go into all of these settings and all of the nodes. I'm just going to highlight some of the more popular nodes. So first of all, I'm going to create a new node in this area right here. So to do that, exactly the same way that you create anything in Blender, and that is Shift A. So you can also go up to node, and or you can go to add right here, and you can select your nodes from this drop down. But I just find using this shortcut key is so much easier. So Shift A on the keyboard, and then you can go through all these folders like input, output, shader, texture, color, vector, converter, script, group, and layout. Or you can click on search, and you can just type in a name of the node that you're looking for. So the one we are going to add, so I'm just going to do Shift A again, and I'm going to go to texture. These are all the textures that you can add. So a lot of them are textures that you can actually dynamically create within Blender. So let's see if we add a normal checker texture. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and it's going to bring up this node, and I can just click to place it anywhere I want to. And as you can see, it's got a color 1 and a color 2, and also a scale. And then it's got these outputs right here. So it's got a color output and also a factor output. Now we're only going to worry about the color output for this node. So I'm going to take my mouse and I'm going to click there, drag a line, and I'm going to connect that to the base color of our shader. So currently the base color is set to red, but we're going to override that base color with this checker texture. So let's see what happens if I connect this color to base color. It's going to update, and there you can see we have a checker texture or material on our cube. So now I can go ahead and we can change these colors. So I can change the white, let's make that blue, and maybe this gray I can change to black, and you can see that's updating in our scene. So we have this texture running into our base color, which is quite cool. So now if we go back to our layout, you can see that our cube has got those properties, and now you can still go ahead and you can change things like the metallic of this material, or the specular, or the roughness. If you want to make it very reflective, you can see there it's nice and reflective, so you can play with these settings still. So let's go back to our shading nodes. I'm just going to zoom out here slightly, and I'm going to move, you can move these things around, so you can just drag it closer and try and make it a little bit neater. So let's see what other textures we can input into our base color. So I'm going to right click or press Shift A again, and then go to texture. So we can do something like a magic texture. Let's see what that does. So I'm going to disconnect this checker node. So I'm just going to take this dot and just drag to release that line, and you'll see it will go back to our original base color. And now this magic texture, let's connect the color to the base color and see what happens. So you can see we have a very interesting looking texture, and now we can try and start playing with these properties of this node. So I'm going to increase the scale or decrease the scale, and you can see how that's changing our texture. And also this number here, you can play around. Also the depth will also change some things around. And yeah, you can see this is why it's called the magic texture. Quite interesting. So let's disconnect that one, and let's see what other nodes we can add. So Shift A, texture, and maybe let's try a sky texture. So I'm going to put the sky texture there, connect the color to my base color, wait for it to update. And now we can see this is supposed to be a sky texture. So I'm just going to play around with these settings. Maybe if we change, I've never actually used this texture before, so let's try something else. I'm going to delete this node. So with this node selected, I'm going to press X on the keyboard, same shortcut as we use in the normal view to delete anything. So create a new node, Shift A, texture, and let's look at the gradient texture, and we connect that to our base color. Now you can see we have a gradient, so it goes from dark to bright, or dark to light, black to white, and yeah, so that is also quite interesting. And you can change these things from linear to maybe something else, spherical maybe. You can add a spherical gradient like that. So let's say we want to add a texture image that we downloaded from the internet. So I'm going to delete this node. So with this node selected, just press X, and we can delete these two as well. So you can just drag a box around them and then just X on the keyboard to delete them. So we want to add an image texture. So I'm going to go Shift A, and then under texture, you'll see image texture. So I'm going to click that, and I'm just going to place it here. And now you can see we've got a new and an open. So I want to open an image file from my computer. So I'm going to click open, and I'm going to go to the folder where I downloaded my textures. And I downloaded this from Quixel, which is a very nice website where you can find materials. And I'm going to go for the wood texture and just this first one that I downloaded. Now here you can see a few different materials that come with this one material. So you'll see things like albedo, AO, displacement, 2 displacements, a normal map, and a roughness map, and then just kind of a preview. Now, this can get quite complicated, but I'm just going to show you some of the basics. So a lot of these different texture maps will do different things to the way your material looks in a 3D application. So for instance, the albedo will just be the color information, just the texture, how it will look like, what is in the texture, and just the different colors. Then you get something like displacement, or let's talk about normal map first. Normal map is a way for a 3D application to kind of fake any bumps in your material. So let's say you have a concrete material, and as you know, concrete is not perfectly flat, so it will have little bumps, etc. And a normal map will try and fake those bumps. So if there's a light that moves across that surface, you'll be able to see little shadows and little highlights, and it will kind of give you the appearance of a material that's not just completely flat. Now, normal map is kind of a way to fake it. It's not exactly adding any geometry to make it bumpy. But then you get something called displacement. And displacement is very similar to a normal map, but displacement actually adds geometry to your model to create those actual bumps. So displacement will add a lot of extra geometry. So if you're creating assets for a game or anything where you need to work with low poly assets, I will suggest rather to use a normal map unless you have permission to use displacement to create all that extra geometry. And then you get something that's called roughness, or the roughness map. Now this will basically tell your material, because if you think of let's think of like a metal type of material or a metal object that you get in real life. Now that metal object might have areas on the metal surface that's more reflective and areas on that metal surface that's less reflective. It's the same material, it's the same surface, but it will have different reflective properties, depends on where on that image you're looking at or on that flat panel. So a roughness map will give you exactly that. It's just a black and white image of your texture, and it will tell Blender or any other 3D application which part of that image is more reflective and which part of that image is less reflective. So it's usually if it's white, it will be more reflective, and if it's black, it will be less reflective, or you can invert that and it will be the other way around. So it's just black and white information. And so we're going to look at some of these. So first of all, we're going to load in our normal albedo map, which is just the color map for that texture. So I'm going to click on this one and I'm going to open image to load it in. And you can see that we have our node in here now, and it's not connected, so we can't see anything on our cube yet. But now we can drag this color and I can connect it to my base color. And let's give it a second to update. And there you can see we have our wood texture on our cube. So you can see it's looking pretty cool, looking pretty nice. And that is basically how that texture looks like. So you can see it's very shiny across it's using the same amount of reflectivity across this, which is not very realistic, and that's what I explained earlier when I spoke about the roughness map that we're going to import soon. So what we can do next is let's bring in another image map that we're going to map to maybe this roughness. So you can now either duplicate this node and then we can just change the file that we loaded, or we can create a new one. So let me show you how to duplicate a node, exactly the same way we do duplication in Blender. So you select this node and then Shift D on the keyboard, and that's going to duplicate that node for you. So I'm just going to move this one down here just below this one, and then we want to reload the texture into this node. So I'm going to click on this open icon again, and this time I'm not going to load the albedo, but I'm going to load my roughness map. So this roughness map, which is just a black and white image, and I'm going to open that. Now we can see at the bottom it says color space is sRGB, which means it's normal color information, the red, green, and the blue. But I want to change this to non color, because we don't really worry about the color information of a roughness map. As I said, it's just a black and white image. So we're going to change this to non-color. Okay. And then we're going to take this roughness and we're going to input that or connect that to our roughness value right here. So currently we just use the slider to change the roughness. You can see there in the image, if I increase the roughness, it will be less reflective. And if I decrease this all the way to 0, it will be perfect mirror reflective. So I'm just going to set that back to the center somewhere. So we're going to connect this image to this value. So I'm just going to take this color information and just drag it over and connect it to roughness. And now it's going to use that color information or the black and white information inside that roughness JPEG, and it's going to apply that to this image. So we don't really see a lot of difference, but there is definitely a difference between the reflectivity of some of the parts of this image. Now let's look at a bump map. So remember, the bump map or the normal map is kind of the fake way of adding depth to your models. So I'm just going to move this one out of the way and I'm going to duplicate this. So Shift D, duplicate it to there. Let's zoom in here. And this time I'm going to load the normal map or the normal map. So I'm going to select this normal and then open image. And this time we need to connect it to a normal map node. So I'm going to go Shift A, and this time I'm just going to search. So click on search, and then we're going to type NOR, and you'll see normal and also normal map. So I'm going to select normal map and just place it there. Now we need to connect our normal node from color to color. And then you'll see it's got normal here. And then we also have a normal input value on our shader. So I'm going to take this normal map and just connect it to this normal. And now it's going to update. And you'll see that it looks a little different. It almost looks like it's got depth to it. I'm just going to disable this one to show you the difference. So to disable and enable or hide a node, you can select it like so. And then press M on your keyboard for mute. So M to mute, and you'll see it will go gray, and that will see the difference. And then you can just toggle that on by just pressing M, 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 M. So you can see that's with it switched off, and that's with it switched on. You can kind of see it looks like we have some geometry there, but it's all fake. If I zoom in here, you'll see this is definitely all flat. But it's going to try and fake that. If the light changes, you'll be able to see a slight variation in shadows, etc. So that's also just a nice way to make your models look a little bit more realistic. Now, lastly, I want to show you how a displacement map works. And remember, the displacement map is where it will actually add new geometry to your object to create actual bumps. So to do that, we first need to duplicate one of these. So I'm just going to zoom in here, and I'm going to take this one, duplicate it, so Shift D. I'm just going to move it over to this side. Just zoom out here, and I'm going to place it on this side. Because we don't have any displacement on our shader, we will have to connect it to the material output. You'll see that it's got a displacement connector right there at the bottom. So I'm going to place my image here, and I'm going to go to the open icon. And now we want to load our displacement map. So you'll see currently this material that I downloaded has got two displacement maps. So you can see that one is a JPEG and this one is an EXR. Just two different file types. Doesn't really matter, but I'm going to go with a JPEG. It's a lot smaller and just easier to work with. So I'm going to open up the displacement JPEG. And next we want to input that into a displacement node. So it converts it from color to displacement data. So I'm going to press Shift A, search, and then I'm just going to type DIS for displacement and choose displacement. And there we go. Now we see we've got some things here, and I can take my color and I'm going to connect it to height, because that's the the height of that that black and white image basically. So we also don't have to worry about color, so we can change this to non-color. And then the displacement output is going to go into the displacement of our material output. Now you can see nothing is happening because there's a few things we need to do. So first of all, with the Eevee renderer does not do displacement. So this is currently Eevee renderer, this material preview that we see here. So currently, if we scroll down here on our material properties, you'll see at the bottom it's got settings, but there's no settings for displacement, and that's because we are using the Eevee renderer. So we need to switch to cycles first before you can see the displacement settings. So to do that, we're going to go to our render settings. So that's this camera icon on this panel, render properties. And then right at the top it says render engine, and as you can see it's by default on Eevee. So I'm going to switch this to cycles, and it's going to slow down things a little bit. And because we are still in this material preview shading view, it's not going to change to cycles. We need to be in the render view right at the side. So if you click on this one, it's going to switch over to cycles, and it's going to be a lot slower, but we're going to get more realistic results. So now let's just swap over to a side where it's a little bit lighter. I think we just need to add a light to our scene. So I'm just going to press Shift A and just add a light, point light. And I'm just going to move it out of the cube. So GZ, and I'm just going to move it over to this side and then just make it brighter. So with this light properties, I'm going to make this about 100. Let's make it 300 watts, maybe something like that, so we can kind of just see a material a little bit better. So now let's see if I just get a nice view and I click on this. So now we've got this displacement in here, and if we select our cube and we go to the material properties, if we scroll down to settings, so you'll see there's actually displacement drop down now, but also settings, and we want to go to settings. And now you'll see that it says displacement bump only. So bump is this normal thing, this normal map that we added here. So that is the bump map, or you can call it normal map. So I want to change this bump only to, you can either do displacement only or displacement and bump. So let's just go with displacement only. We're not really worried about this normal map. We can actually delete that. And now let's see if we can see any changes to our geometry. So I'm going to start increasing this scale on our displacement node. So currently you can see it's set to 1. So I'm going to just up that to about 5. And you can see definitely there's something happening, because if we look at it from the side, you can see that it kind of expanded. But the problem is we don't have enough geometry on this cube to actually create all those little details. Because remember, this cube only consists of a flat face on each side. There's no extra geometry that Blender can actually use to create those bumps. So we need to add more geometry to this model. So an easy way to do that, we're going to go into edit mode. So with this cube selected, press tab, and then make sure you have all your faces selected. So first of all, let's go into face select mode, which is 3 on the keyboard. And then you can just press A to select everything, make sure everything's selected. And now we're going to start just to add more geometry. And to do that is right click and then subdivide. So I'm going to right click subdivide, and I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again. Do it a few times until you have many small little faces, maybe once more. That should be enough. And now we can go out of edit mode. So I'm going to press tab on the keyboard, and instantly you can see something happening. So you can see here on the side of this cube, there's something interesting going on here. It's actually changing the way, and you can see it here at the top as well. And this is called displacement. So it's using that displacement image to actually change the physical geometry of this cube. Now, obviously, scale 5 is way too much. I'm going to bring this down to about 0.5. And now you can see we have a little bit less distortion or that adding of geometry going on. It's a little bit more subtle, which is a bit more realistic. So if you look at it from the side, you can actually see that it's going kind of in and then out, and you can see what it's doing here. So we can even decrease this a little bit more. Sorry, this size, maybe set it to 0.2, and that will give you just a little bit more realistic looking material. So before I end this lesson, I quickly want to show you guys and girls how our UV editor is looking with this texture, because I think this is going to make a bit more sense what we did in the UV editing or the UV unwrapping and how this material is applied to this cube. So I'm going to go over to the UV editing right here at the top. So just click UV editing, and now you can see we can see our cube, and if I zoom out on this side, you can see we have a texture. So I'm just going to click here to deselect everything, and currently you can see the texture. So if we click here at the top, we can choose which of our textures we're currently seeing. And by default, this is on the displacement one. So I want to change this to show the actual colors of this texture. So I'm going to click on the drop down, and I want to select the albedo or albedo JPEG that we added as our texture. And now you can see it's actually showing us our texture. So now what I want to do is I want to select all these faces. So I'm going to press A on the keyboard on this side. And now you can see how these faces are actually placed on this UV editor. Now, obviously we have all these subdividing faces because of our displacement, but I want to try and see if I can just unsubdivide this quickly to make this just seem a little bit easier to understand. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to unsubdivide, 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 and now we just need to unwrap this again. So I'm going to right click unwrap, and I'm going to try let's try the Smart UV project. Okay, now we get something like that. Okay, and I'm gonna, on this side, I'm just gonna enable material preview. So I'm gonna click this little material preview at the top so we can see our material. And now if I select one of these faces, so let's look at these two faces, okay? I'm gonna turn on the sync here on the side so we can see all the faces. So if I click on this face, you'll see this is the face on our UV unwrap side here. And this face is right next to it. So you can see these two faces are actually next to each other on our model. Now if I zoom in here, you can see that this texture doesn't really flow from there to there. So it might be that this face is actually rotated. So I'm going to show you what happens if I rotate this face on the UV editor. So with this face selected, I'm just going to press R on the keyboard, and I'm going to rotate it, and you'll see what is happening to that texture on the right hand side. So if I just place it something like that, you can see that we changed the orientation, how this texture is actually being projected onto that face. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to rotate again, but this time I'm going to hold in Control to snap, and I'm going to rotate it all the way around like that. And we can still see that this is not matching up, so I'm going to rotate it further. Rotate, hold in Control to snap, rotate to there, and now you can see it's still not, that's still not flowing correctly over from this face to this face. I'm going to rotate it again, hold in Control to snap, also not right, and I'm going to rotate it again. Now we're probably back to the beginning, and you can see that's also not right. So a way to figure out what's going on here, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to go into edge mode. So press 2 on the keyboard, and I'm going to click on this edge and see which edge is actually sharing these two faces. So I'm going to click on this edge right here, and you can see that's the edge on this side of this face and this side of this face. So they're actually the wrong way around. So this face should be flipped around and placed on this side. or this one should just move out, if that makes any sense. So these two edges should be the same edge. So what you can do obviously is you can right click now and you can say stitch, and that's going to stitch those two together. And now I can move these two faces. So I'm just going to go into face mode and select them and move them, maybe just going to move them somewhere here just to show you what's happening here. Now if we select this edge right in the middle, you can see that is our edge. And if I go into face select mode 3, you can see this this face is this face, this face is this face. And now if we look at our texture, you can see it's flowing across this edge perfectly. There's no seam there. You can actually see that texture is just continuing on that side. You can see it here as well. That's very nice. So that's how you decide how you're going to place your UVs inside your scene. So sometimes you will just worry about everything around maybe your model, but underneath it doesn't really matter, because obviously you won't be able to have this seamless, or that this texture actually flows around from all edges. It all depends on the texture and what you are trying to do. So obviously here you can see this is kind of working. This is kind of working okay. It's not really flowing perfectly. But then this one is completely different. It kind of, the wood grains go upwards and these ones all go sideways. So you'll go in here again and maybe just rotate this one around like that. Also a quick way to rotate something is to just click on it and then R, and then you can specify the degrees. So I can just type in 90 and that will flip it 90 degrees. Or you can do R180 and that will flip it 180 degrees. So I just wanted to show you quickly how this texture works with UV unwrapping. So that will maybe make, just explain that a little better. So if we go back to shading, we can see we have all our shading nodes here. And there are so many other nodes that you can use here. So let's say I want to have a RGB curves in here to adjust my color, the brightness and the different colors of this texture. I can do that as well. So I can do Shift A to create a new node. And I think it's under color, but let's just, yeah, so there you can see RGB curves. We've got hue and saturation, gamma or bright contrast. So I'm just going to go with RGB curves, and then I'm going to place this one in the middle of this line. And if I click there, it's going to automatically connect that node into that system. So now I can go and you can play around with these curves, and as I do that, you can see that our image is actually changing. So I can add a little bit of contrast, bring this down maybe like so, and then brighten that up to add a bit of a heavy contrast, something like that. Or you can now go and you can say I want a little bit more blue, so I can go to the B and increase the blue and maybe decrease the green. So go to G and then decrease the green, and maybe more red. I want to bring some more red in there. So you can have all these controls in your node editor to build complex materials, as you can see, by adding images from externally and piping them into your shader. And then you can also manipulate your images by using curves and adjustment layers or adjustment nodes to control the way your materials will look like. So there you can see we have our material in our normal viewport. You can see it's looking pretty cool. And yeah, go ahead and play around with some materials, add some materials to your scenes, and I will see you in the next lesson.